To the political bombshell that exploded today after the publication of an interview with Christine Blasey Ford, who up until now had anonymously claimed that Brett Kavanaugh tried to physically force himself on her while drunk at a high school party nearly 4 decades ago when he was 17 years old. The interview includes new details and corroboration in the form of therapist's notes from 6 years ago. I want to make sure you're fully informed with all the facts you need. So here's the timeline. In July, Christine Blasey Ford wrote to her member of Congress, California Democrat Anna Eshoo, detailing the assault and asking to remain anonymous. Congresswoman Eshoo then forwarded the letter to Senator Dianne Feinstein, the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which of course was handling the Kavanaugh confirmation. Dianne Feinstein shared the contents of the letter with a small number of aides and fellow senators, but honored the request for anonymity. Neither the existence of the letter or its contents were brought up at any stage of the confirmation process, either publicly or privately. On Wednesday last week, online news outlet The Intercept published a story about the letter, accusing Senator Feinstein of withholding it. The next day, Feinstein, still trying to honor the request for anonymity, referred the matter to the FBI and made that referral public without revealing its contents. That set off a media firestorm, which resulted in Ronan Farrow from The New Yorker going public with the allegations, still at that point anonymous ones. Brett Kavanaugh has categorically and unequivocally denied this allegation, and the Judiciary Committee vote on his nomination remains scheduled for this Thursday. The letter itself has now been published. Democrats are united in calling for a delay while this matter is fully investigated. Some Republicans, including Lindsey Graham and Jeff Flake, say they want to hear directly from Ms. Ford, the alleged victim, before moving forward. And now, Senator Chuck Grassley, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, says he is actively working on following up with both Brett Kavanaugh and Ms. Ford before proceeding with the confirmation process. Now, those are the facts. And based on what we know now, at this point, here's my opinion. 1. None of this changes the fact that Brett Kavanaugh is qualified for a seat on the court, and that his judicial philosophy is not only in line with what Donald Trump promised in the 2016 campaign, but good for the country. 2. Dianne Feinstein has been unfairly castigated in all this. It was not her, but The Intercept that put this matter in the public domain. 3. Some on the left have politicized this in a deeply disturbing way. Just look at this statement from the liberal pro-choice group NARAL. Quote, "The charge of sexual assault against Brett Kavanaugh is disqualifying, and we call on him to immediately withdraw his nomination for the Supreme Court." The charge, an accusation on its own, is disqualifying. Imagine if we accepted that as the new standard. Anyone could make up anything about a candidate or nominee that they oppose politically, destroy them personally, and prevent them from public office. Our republic depends on good men and women who love their country and love their community, stepping into the arena to serve and lead their fellow citizens. This outrageous new standard that any attack at all, any allegation, can end someone's career, that is the true threat to democracy, not President Trump, as all these leftists claim. This is quite simply the rule of the mob, and we must not allow it to prevail. Right, joining me now on the phone to help break all this down, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, really appreciate you being with us tonight at short notice. Let me start by asking you to give your legal take on one of the elements of this that people are really focusing on, which is the fact that it was all such a long time ago. Brett Kavanaugh, at the time of the alleged incident, was 17 years old. What does that mean from a legal perspective?
Good evening, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm sorry that I'm unable to be with you in studio. I don't think his age is significant, but legally, that is, to the prosecutorial mind, if this were presented as a case, because 17 is certainly above the age of reason. And if this happened, as Dr. Ford claims it did, it would be worthy of investigating. But what is significant is the passage of time between the alleged event and the present. Brett Kavanaugh has undergone 6 FBI investigations, 4 for his work at the Bush White House, including 3 for various levels of security clearances, 1 for the judicial position he now holds, which is the second highest court in the land, the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, and the 6th, of course, for the position for which President Trump has nominated him. And not a whiff of this has been perceived by these very thorough allegations. So it makes one wonder if this was timed. Now, the timing of it would cause the prosecutorial or the law enforcement mind to discount it and be very, very suspicious about its credibility.
So that's very interesting. So that phrase you use, age of reason, is very interesting. So when people say, look, if this happened, it was such a long time ago, he was basically a child, not an adult. Just to be clear, you're saying that's not an argument that holds?
No, that's not an argument that holds. Clearly, in the state of Maryland, which is where this alleged event is purported to have taken place, at the time that it occurred, a 17-year-old could be tried for the crime of attempted rape, which is what this Dr. Ford has alleged, and be tried as an adult. So I don't think that's the issue. The issue is, should she be believed because she waited this long? Now, she will say, and her supporters will say, and I think she has said this, Steve, she repressed the memory of this until she was in some sort of a counseling session with her husband, and it just came out, and she has produced the notes from the a person who was conducting the counseling session as support of her bona fides in this respect. But it is hard for me to believe that the FBI didn't come up with a whiff of this. Having been the subject of these types of scrutiny, when I myself went on the bench, I know how thorough they are.
Right. So some people are saying, well, this is different now because there are these notes. That wasn't there. It's no longer just an anonymous letter. It's now a public letter. And there's the first hint of corroboration. People were saying before that this is just one person's story. There's no corroboration. These notes seem to change that. Do they, in your view, or not really? They
do. They do provide some sort of corroboration because the notes go back to 2012 when Brett Kavanaugh was not, in anybody's mind, being considered for the Supreme Court. And, of course, we're in the Me Too era. My prediction is that she's going to be testifying, a la Anita Hill, and they're going to bring back Judge Kavanaugh and the Senate to testify about this subject, these allegations, and the Senate Judiciary Committee will decide who they believe. And we're going to go through the gut-wrenching type of hearing that we went through back in the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas days.
So, last question, Judge. Do you think that's what should happen, in your opinion, based on what we know now? Is that what you think should happen next?
I'm not in favor of all the histrionics, but I am in favor of giving this woman her fair say and giving Judge Kavanaugh his opportunity to deny it. The burden is on her to prove the validity of these claims. The idea that a charge itself is disabling, as you just said so nicely in your opening statement, is absurd and anti-American. She has to prove this charge, or at least prove it with enough evidence that that it challenges whether or not a senator can vote for his confirmation.
All right, Judge, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us. Let's go now to Capitol Hill senior producer Chad Pergram. Chad, what's your sense of what this does to the process, the confirmation process?
Well, the first thing you have to know is that the Judiciary Committee was scheduled to meet on Thursday to vote this nomination onto the Senate floor. Now, Jeff Flake, Republican senator from Arizona, who I spoke with earlier tonight, says he doesn't think that they can forge ahead unless they hear from Ford. Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, also a member of that committee, has sort of suggested something similar, not as strong as Flake. As the judge said, this is eerily similar to what happened in 1991 with Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill. The Judiciary Committee in 1991 had closed the hearing. They had already heard from Clarence Thomas. And then the allegations about Anita Hill came forth, and they reopened the hearing. They heard from Anita Hill. They heard from Clarence Thomas. We're in this gray area. You know, it's often said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. So we don't know if they will just hear from her in private. That's, you know, conditioned on whether or not she wants to come forth, or whether or not they will have a full-blown hearing like they did in 1991. And Republicans have to be very careful about how they play this. If they misplay this, we're in the Me Too era here. Democrats can turn this around on the Republicans very quick and use this as a wedge in the midterm, Steve.
So, Chad, let's just look at the detailed timing, because, of course, the election is hugely critical here, particularly when we're now seeing signs that the Senate itself, once considered to be invulnerable, now may be in play. What's the timing if they reopen it, as we're hearing? Well, how long can the process go on before,
it's unclear.
Can it be completed before the elections?
It certainly may be before the election here, but I want to tell you this. The math on Capitol Hill is unmutable. It's 51 to 49 in the Senate right now. 51 Republicans, 49 Democrats. And if, you know, people like Jeff Flake or others start to peel off here, you know, two senators who we have not heard from, who have not weighed in, Republican senators, are Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine. You know, they probably, you know, are really looking at this very closely. In fact, Susan Collins talked by phone with Kavanaugh about this and other issues on Friday. She followed up. She had some questions about going through the documents, and then this had come out last week, and we're told that they, in fact, did talk about this a little bit on Friday. So you could see how you could drop below that 50-vote margin very quickly. And you know, the timetable was this. This is, you know, if the Republicans are trying to forge ahead and, you know, and are perceived as doing so like a bull in a china shop, that looks bad for them. Now let's take a step back. Again, the committee vote was supposed to be on Thursday. Nowhere is it written that you have to have a favorable vote from the committee. It's 11 to 10, 11 Republicans, 10 Democrats in the committee. Judge Bork, Robert Bork in 1987, he got an unfavorable vote from the committee and then was defeated on the Senate floor. There was no recommendation in the case of Clarence Thomas. He was confirmed 52 to 48. So that's not written in stone anywhere. But here's the key. There's going to be a procedural vote if they forge ahead on the current timeline a week from Monday, which would cut off debate. And then you would have a confirmation vote on the 26th. They want to get him on the court before the 1st of October. But if you're starting to have, you know, days of witnesses, you know, they had a full weekend full of hearings when they reopened these in 1991. It was quite a scene. In fact, you know, all the networks carried them live. CBS even debated whether or not they should, carry the hearings or the baseball playoffs. They carried the baseball playoffs, and the other networks got better ratings. So this could delay this potentially, up to 2 weeks. But I talked to some people tonight, including, the office of the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and nobody has any timing guidance right now. That's why I say we're in this kind of cryptic gray area about the future of the nomination.
So there's a couple of things in there I just want to make really clear for our audience, because that's why we wanted you on, because you know this better than anyone. I've seen speculation about the committee vote, that Jeff Flake, if he peels off because of Doug Jones being elected in Alabama, means that actually they can't get it out of the committee. That's incorrect. You're saying that doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Even if Jeff
right.
Flake
right.
peels off. Got it.
Right. It doesn't matter that
important.
much. Right. I mean,
okay.
you could.
Second,
nowhere is it written you can just put something on the floor. They didn't even used to have committee votes back in the 19th century.
So that's a red herring. The second vote you mentioned was the procedural vote a week on Monday. What exactly is that about, and could that be derailed by a rogue Republican? Right.
Well, if it's only 51-49, and it's going to be tough to confirm him anyway, you could see maybe Jeff Flake or Lindsey Graham. Yes, exactly. That's on the Senate floor. And keep in mind, if we were operating under the old, procedures here, remember, the Republicans changed the precedent. This was called the nuclear option, to lower the bar from 60 votes to a simple majority to get Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court last year. If we were dealing with 60 votes, and considering where some of the other Republicans were right now, this thing would be dead in the water right now. That's not the case, but because you're at that narrow turning radius of 51-49, that procedural vote is hard. But I tell you, I bet it doesn't even come to that right now if Republicans start to make a lot of noise and say we can't forge ahead until we hear hear from Christine Ford and do due diligence. Again, you know, we're in the Me Too era here. They can't misplay this going into the midterms.
Okay, last question, Chad. Do you think that there's a chance that we go into the midterms with this Supreme Court seat being open? And second part, if that's the case, is there a scenario where that actually helps Republicans because the stakes are so high for those elections in terms of control of the Senate?
Absolutely, because, you know, Republicans then might be able to make the case and say, you know, look, we didn't get our person on the Supreme Court in spite of this baggage. That's a problem. Go out and vote for Republicans. Democrats, again, as I said earlier, would use this as a wedge and say, you know, are they going to go and nominate someone like this again? You know, this is why we need to have more Democrats in the Senate. This becomes a key midterm issue. And that's why, you know, you have this sort of comet coming out of the sky at the last minute. You know, we're a long way from the midterm elections, and a lot can pivot, you know, on this right before then. Both parties are very mindful of this nomination, and nobody quite knows how to play this just yet. But they're all looking back to what happened in 1991 with Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas.
Well, very high stakes. Chad, thank you so much for clarifying that. We really appreciate it.
Sure.